Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, freelance editor. Last week we talked about story structure the whole week, and this week I'm going to spend the entire week talking about scene structure. I'm really excited to talk about scene structure because it's really important. A lot of the time a writer gets stuck and they feel like they have all the other pieces in place, but the pacing is wrong or they're just not quite writing up to the level that they want to be, and scene structure is often the reason for that. So I'm really excited to make videos about scene structure this week. There are two types of scenes: reactive scenes, which are more emotional, and I'm going to talk about that on Friday. But for the first 4 days of this week, I'm going to talk about proactive scenes, which are more about action and conflict. So I want to start the week by talking about a very important aspect of scenes, which is the character's goal. Your character has their overarching goal for the novel, what they're trying to achieve, the end goal, but there's going to be a lot of smaller goals that will lead to that end point towards the climax of the novel. There may be a lot of stepping stones, a lot of little objectives that help to reach this larger objective. A lot of the time when scenes aren't feeling right, the pacing doesn't feel right, or the scene's just kind of boring, it's because there's no goal. The character is kind of wandering around. They might be kind of aimless. A lot of the time you can tell when your scenes are missing a goal because the characters will spend a lot of time talking, but that talking isn't really advancing the plot, or they might spend a lot of time on drinking or eating or staring out the window, contemplating. These are the kinds of traps you can fall into when you don't have a goal to really guide the direction of your scene. So when you're writing a proactive scene, there are two basic ways that you can handle the goal. The first is that the character has the goal from the beginning of the scene. So the scene starts, the character knows what they want to achieve. It's pretty clearly set forth. So this might be a scene where the character wants to go to a particular location. The goal is to get to that location, and then the scene moves forward from there. The second way to handle the goal is a little bit more complicated, and this is where people are more likely to get tripped up when they're writing the scene. So if you have a scene where the character's goal is not apparent from the beginning of the scene, but rather comes from some sort of external situation. So say there's a knock at the door, the character goes to answer the door. When they get there, they get some really bad news that they then have to react to. This is not a problem that the character does not have a goal at the very beginning of the scene, but if you start the scene too early and it takes too long to introduce the knock at the door, and then it takes an extra amount of time to get to the point where the character realizes what they need to do to respond to the bad news, the longer that space is, the more likely the reader is to get bored. So what you really want to do in that situation is introduce whatever the external stimulus is that causes the character to obtain a goal or to acquire a new goal. You want to introduce that as quickly as possible. The faster you can get that into the scene, the faster the character can get a goal, and the faster the scene will start to move forward and feel driven. And that's really what you want to accomplish in a scene, is you want that sense that the character is trying to achieve something and that it's going in a clear direction. That's what keeps the reader interested and invested in seeing what the outcome of the scene is. An alternative to the second situation that often works better is to give the character some sort of temporary goal. It doesn't have to be a goal that you intend to really follow up on, because it may be interfered with and then doesn't really become relevant again. So, for example, rather than starting the scene the second the door knocks, say you want to start the scene earlier than that. If that's the situation, then what's best is to give the character some sort of temporary goal. So the character is maybe trying to make a phone call. They're trying to get in touch with somebody that they think has some information they need to move the plot forward. Then right when the call's about to go through, there's a knock at the door, and then they go and they get the bad news at the door. This really helps to prevent that sense that the character is just waiting around. What you don't want to happen is to create a sense in your scenes where the character is waiting for something to happen to them, because it makes your character seem inactive, but it also causes a sort of drag, a sense that the reader is just waiting to see when is something going to happen, when is the conflict going to start, when are you going to get to the point of the scene. So inserting a temporary goal at the beginning of the scene is one way that you can avoid that. I'm going to run through a few types of goals your character could have in a scene, because I think it will really help to give you a better sense of how you can insert these goals into scenes, especially if you're one of the writers who struggles in this area. So here are a few ideas of types of goals. 1, the character could be trying to obtain some kind of information. 2, the character could be trying to get to some kind of location. 3, the character could be trying to obtain some sort of object. And 4, the character could be trying to fight an enemy. They could be pursuing a fight with somebody in order to solve a problem. So those are 4 simple types of goals, just to get you thinking about how you might use goals in your scenes and to give you a little bit more variety. I know sometimes it can be hard to understand what it means to have a goal and how that might play out in your novel. And don't forget, in your scenes, the character does not have to succeed at their goal. The goal just serves a function within the scene structure. Your character will probably not achieve their goals very, very often, if not the majority of the time. So I talked about in a previous video that the problem with having a protagonist that doesn't drive the plot forward and why it can hurt your novel if the protagonist isn't really stepping into that role. Creating an objective or a goal for every scene really helps to avoid that problem because the character is clearly being proactive when they have something that they're trying to achieve. Some writers have a hard time coming up with scenes where the protagonist has a goal because it's much easier for them to think of things happening to the protagonist. It's easier to think of possible conflicts that could happen. So sometimes you have to sort of shift your mindset when you're writing so that you can think about what would the character do in this situation, what steps could the character take at this point, and sometimes that requires some significant changes to the plotting of the story. Sometimes when a writer learns about scene structure, they learn about goal, they realize that most of their scenes lack a goal, and that can be a huge challenge to fix. So it can be really helpful to think about the goal as you're writing the scenes the first time, or as you're plotting the novel, or during early rounds of revision, because it can save you a lot of time. I hope this video gave you a better idea of how goals work in scenes. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about conflicts in scenes, and we will continue our discussion of scene structure. So please subscribe so you don't miss any videos, and I will see you guys tomorrow.